Hi, welcome to another episode of I Mustache You Something. This is the first. Don't boo. You can't boo. You're on the show. You can't
Booing
boo if you're
myself.
on the
I
show.
can boo myself.
No, don't boo yourself. You should feel encouraged. You feel uh,
I
empowered
actually,
to be here.
I not only feel encouraged, I feel empowered was exactly the word I was going to use. So I will retract my boo.
Yeah, I mean, you can boo me, but like in private, like between us. So this is the first group mustache, and I haven't really figured out like a good pun. So we mustache each other something, maybe. I don't know. So we have Ana and Yousef and Marcus, and all three of them had interesting perspectives on Coptic identity. And there was a lot of conversation in all of the mustache, maybe not all, but many of the mustache interviews about identity, and a lot of them about Coptic identity, and a lot of them about the tension between the cultural and the spiritual. So, on that question, I think we can start. And, I don't think you guys necessarily need to summarize your whole mustache interview or your whole position on this, but just get us started with a little bit of something on, your thoughts on Coptic identity and whether it's more of a cultural identity or more of a spiritual identity, or if it's neither, what it is. Let's go alphabetical with Ana, and then Marcus, and then Yousef, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Um, to keep it short and sweet, I do think that being Coptic is more of a spiritual identity, but culture definitely has influence in that and can change it, I think, and modify it for better or for worse.
So you can elaborate a little bit on, sort of where that came from, and just in case Marcus or Yousef or someone else that's listening to this, didn't get a chance to watch your previous episode, what sort of informs that opinion that you have?
Um, I did an independent study for those who don't know on like overall identity development in multicultural individuals, specifically American Egyptians who are Coptic or identify as Coptic, and each and every single one of them said that between being American, Egyptian, or Coptic Orthodox Christian, being Coptic was the most central to their identity. Not that the other things didn't play a part, but being Coptic was most central. And they said that that was because um, being Coptic influenced almost every decision that they made on a day to day basis, big or small, and how they viewed the world around them and interact with it. Um, and overall more like emotionally attached to it, and that it defines what they believe. um yeah.
So we have one vote for Coptic is mostly a spiritual identity, and that comes from conversations with the people that you interviewed for your project. So Marcus.
Yeah, I think it's for me. I through the years, and I am expecting for that maybe to get developed and more change in the future. So I went through many phases, and each phase um, the this definition. Some stuff has been added, some stuff has been taken out of that definition. But for me, the more the merrier. So and also I like harmony and put all the stuff together in harmonious and tension and reconciliation things. So when it's mostly spiritual at church or at a gathering that is ready to accept that Copticity is spiritual, I would go with it. If that gathering is not a faith based or mainly with people, because there are many peoples whom I got to know whom don't have any connection uh, by choice or by choice or without choice. They don't have any connection now with the Coptic community, the mainstream Coptic community. So when I am with that group of people, I am more talking about the culture and ethnicity. And when I am with people who are not ethnically Copt, I am trying to connect with anything that connects me as a Copt, either spiritual or ethnic, with this group of people. So, and I always like to remind myself and I look for any ethnicities that I would connect with. So I always identify as like, I am Mediterranean, North African, and African, and what else? Middle Eastern, and anything like Christian and Orthodox, and all of these things. So, so yeah, it's the more the merrier, and depending on the situation.
Okay. Yousef?
Yousef is gonna throw a curveball to everybody. I think Coptic, first of all, you have to ask yourself, what do you mean by Coptic identity? But if you were to separate everything out, my gut tells me to separate everything, but I can also see the argument for calling the word Coptic as a big tent the way that it originated. But let me start with what my gut says. My gut says it's important to separate Coptic from Orthodox. And I think, Ana, to what you were saying, I think it would seem to me, or it seems to me, that it is what those people who define themselves as Coptic and say that being Coptic determines or helps them determine the answers to most of their decisions. I think those people might be touching on Orthodoxy or on Christianity more than they might be touching on the fact that they're Coptic. But at the same time, I wouldn't like to just say that it's an ethnicity, because I think that it's very exclusionary and isn't technically accurate, because culture is a construct. It's not like you're born into the culture. You can certainly adopt the culture. And so your ethnicity sort of has nothing to do with it either. But if I were to come down and stake a claim somewhere, I would stake a claim and say that it is closest to the way that Jewish people describe being Jewish. That at some point it was a close contact with people who were living in the same space, but it's a shared cultural and religious identity that grows out of that. And there are people who share in the religion and there are people who share in the culture who don't necessarily mutually benefit from the other. But if you were to go with the big tent, and that's what I was referring to at the beginning of what I was saying, then I think that's the biggest tent that you could establish and say is Coptic and still be fair.
So do you guys have questions for each other? So I can step aside a little bit here.
I comment, like I'm really with Yousef on that I don't know, I think it's a mainstream understanding in the Coptic community, and that connection with like Copts are just Orthodox or even mainly Orthodox, where I think this can be, and I agree with Yusuf in that, it's like it can be exclusionary, or any boxing of Copticity or the forms of Copticities can be exclusionary if it's just ethnicity. If somebody is like really telling, oh, it's just ethnicity, it's just religiosity, it's very boxing and it's very exclusionary. So, but the main argument that we find all the time, it's like people say Copts are just Orthodox or even mainly Orthodox, where in reality, uh, we share a lot less with other Orthodox folks than, for example, Muslim Egyptians, in my opinion. So, so like, and that's why when folks in our community try to really push hard and like, oh, I'm gonna read a lot for Orthodox, like Greek or Russian Orthodox folks, and or even go to their churches, and like, it's almost totally different. Other than the texts, it's almost totally different. The music is different. How people interact with each other is different. It's so different. Even with our Oriental Orthodox folks who consider the closest um, spiritual siblings, they are so different than us. So, so yeah, it's Copts are not just Orthodox.
I think there's something said for viewing Egyptian Islam through the lens of being Coptic, because I think if I may be wrong about this, I'm not as educated about Islam in other parts of the Middle East and other parts of the world, but I think Egyptian Islam has specific focuses on a lot of things that are a lot more Coptic or Orthodox in nature. Things like the veneration of saints, which the Mulid, the Masrada, like those festivals are huge. I've not heard of that happening in other places in the Muslim world. And similarly, you could go and look at the way that Islam in Egypt is a scholarly endeavor. The Al-Azhar universities in Cairo, and of course the School of Alexandria was the preeminent theological school back in early Christianity. So I think you could draw a lot of parallels between early Christianity in Egypt and early Islam in Egypt. And it's worth seeing that comes from the culture. It's not the other way around. It's not like the religions just influenced each other. There's a root cause there.
My son, maybe this is a very and to add on your on the argument that you started, Yusuf. We listen to all kinds of music. We are like we're singers, and my wife is a professional musician and professor in music, and I really love that I am a an ordained psalter in the church, and I didn't listen to any other music genre at other than the church music. But anyway, so our kids listen to lots of music at home, lots of music. But when we turn on the music, and my 2-year-old, when we turn on the music of like the ortho, like the Coptic church music, or Sufi Muslim music, he would say to both, Baba Kinisa, Kinisa. And this is very instinctual. So it's like nobody told him that, oh, this is the Kinisa, or that this is the, it's just an instinct. Like, so yeah.
So I think the two of you guys are defining being Coptic as being more of a cultural phenomenon. And the distinction between Coptic and Coptic Orthodox is an important one. And I think that the people that Ana is talking to don't necessarily make that distinction because they experience being Coptic only really at church, right? Like they go to church, and Coptic Orthodox, they don't have another reference frame for what it means to be Coptic or what it means to be Egyptian. A lot of them haven't been to Egypt. A lot of them haven't interacted with anyone who's Egyptian who's not Coptic Orthodox. So do you guys think that that's maybe where that comes from?
I mean, certainly, I think, Marcus, you probably could speak to this better than me, having lived in Egypt a lot longer. But I think my experience here, the people that I interacted around me, would certainly use those words interchangeably. I've been very specific about not, but I think you're right. Most of the people that I interact with that would call themselves Coptic are Coptic Orthodox, or most people that I interact with who would call themselves Orthodox are Coptic Orthodox. Most of the people I interact with who call themselves Egyptian are Coptic Orthodox. So that is the majority group among basically all of these umbrellas that we're painting is a given here. But I think I'll still come back to exclusionary, because the experience, we're going to talk about the immigrant experience, I'm sure, through the course of this. So I'll hold on to that one for now. But I think the immigrant experience is unique, and I'll leave it at that for now.
So I think that's something that Ana and I kind of discussed a little bit. So Ana, why don't you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that like as Mina said, I made sure to have a very wide variety of like people and the experiences that they had who I was talking to. So he's right. Some of them have never been to Egypt. Some of them were born in Egypt, but don't speak a word of Arabic and were completely like raised American. Their family intended on assimilating very heavily with American culture once they got here. But, and others obviously grew up for a lot longer in Egypt and like feel more emotionally tied to Egyptian culture, like distinctly, not talking about Coptic Orthodox culture. But also listening to both of your views and stances on how there is more of like an ethnic like based culture in being Coptic versus being Orthodox. I think it's really interesting to think about, like, as Marcus was saying, like when you go to a Russian Orthodox church or an Ethiopian Orthodox church or a Syrian Orthodox church, there's like really big differences. Um, but the main reason why I still see that as more spiritual is because um, many of those differences might be in, like, you know, the way that they sing hymns, how the hymns sound. Um, and like I remember talking to Abuna Sam about this. I think it's the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but like we hold candles while we read the gospel and the liturgy, and they hold, I think, umbrellas on either side of the reader during the gospel because they see God's word as shelter and comforting and home, whereas we see it as the light. But really, it's all the same. We share, for the most part, all the same dogma, the central beliefs, but you know, those like lowercase t traditions, the things that we do, yes, that's culturally influenced, but the question is like what type of culture? Like culture is just like a collection of people that share practices and behaviors and ways of communicating, both like verbally and non-verbally. So I see all of those things, all those differences, as different ways in which we practice our faith, in which we praise, and how we like manifest that dogma that we believe in. And I think that all of those differences, when it comes down to it, are um, spiritually cultural differences, if that makes sense, rather than distinctly ethnically cultural differences. Um, so I think that yes, like being Coptic comes with its own culture separate from being just Orthodox. But I think ultimately those differences still fall into the spiritual category, as their differences in the way that we manifest our spiritual beliefs.
Uh, Um, if I may add, folks, I think when you ask me, us, Mina, what do we think? I think, as I would talk about myself, I think there has to be a distinction between, and that's why I try to use like the mainstream Coptic Orthodox folks, which the thought is instituted or collectively their thought or our thought collectively are formed through the church or maybe Egyptian culture. But I think as like people who are not necessarily mainstream or who have the privilege to mingle between different communities and who because it is a privilege, like I work with newcomers and immigrants, and it's so hard to ask somebody who's a newcomer, like for the first at least 5 years, to really interact heavily and assimilate to other cultures, mainly white North American cultures. Uh, so the main focus, the mentality would be around the church. The main connection would be around the church. I would send the kids like to see other Egyptian kids, and so the response in such research or survey, and I conducted research before. I'm not sure if that's the sample that Anna used or interviewed was the same, but mainly most newcomers, most immigrants to Coptic immigrants in the US who don't have that much privilege of being settled for a long time, or they would say that we're mainly connected to the church. And the other folks who would say otherwise, you won't find them in the church. So because many people, as I mentioned, decided by choice or without choice not to be connected to the church community. So you want, like, by nature, if you go and the sample was mainly a church going Coptic Orthodox folks, um, they would mainly say that it's mostly spiritual. So I think it's a privilege. Like I consider myself, I have a certain privilege that I can go in and out. I can go mingle with other communities and go in and out. So yeah.
So let me ask you this. Is there a difference between this is what being Coptic means to me versus this is what I think being Coptic means universally? Are those two different things? And I want everybody to answer that.
By universally, do you mean a universal truth or a universally held truth?
Take it however you will.
That's not good.
Yeah, I agree. I think when we say universally or what's in the books, again, I think it's what we have been taught can be something, and what's on the ground, especially in a very diverse and unhomogeneous, but sometimes homogeneous North American and diasporic communities, um, it's very hard to say that being Coptic is just a one form, or even universally is, or I would, yeah. So that's why I like to use the mainstream notion would be, and other non-mainstream would be.
Right. And that's why I ask, is there a difference between this is what it means for me, like me Namsiha is Coptic, um, and maybe Ana is also Coptic, but her self-identity as being a Copt is different than my self-identity being a Copt. Like for me, um, I feel more connected to my community and my heritage traveling to Egypt than I do um, connecting with my community here. But for Ana, she's like, maybe I don't know why that would make a difference. I feel just as Coptic being part of a Coptic church here, right? So my question is, are we able to make that distinction between what it means to me to be Coptic versus what I think it means universally?
I think what you're asking is whether a person can have multiple cultures or whether each individual has their own culture. And I think I'm going to err on the side of each individual makes their own culture as a blend of all of the things that they experience. And to say that there is a universal Coptic culture would be wholly incorrect.
Okay. Marcus, do you agree?
Yeah, I think yeah, and also I think maybe we, if I can rephrase the question, or the rephrase the situation that we are in now, I think there should be um, an acceptance, or there should we should mainstream the non-mainstream thoughts about being Coptic. And it's basically what I'm saying is diversity, like accepting that Copts can be diverse. Because many people, when I talk with people in North America, for example, who grew up in just in the Coptic Orthodox community, they don't know that there is a very vibrant Coptic Catholic community. Yes, it's a colonist like back in the
Colonist
days. It's a
Catholic.
colonist or a colonizing, like they took the right, like the colonized, like the colonizing Catholic Church, when they go with the missionary, with whatever colonizers, they take the right of the Christian people existed there, and they adapted it. But regardless, people who go to the Coptic or Catholic Church, they are still ethnically uh, Copts. They are still ethnically Christian Egyptians. So many people don't know that Coptic Catholics. We have like churches in Toronto, in Montreal, all over North America, in New York City. There are vibrant Coptic Catholic communities. There is a vibrant evangelical Copts. So there are so many, and those are just the Christians. Many people who do not go to church, or even don't say that I am a Christian, but I am proud Copt. So, like the acceptance of this idea, like I see many people get either surprised of knowing this because we don't talk about it, or they think that, oh, like they want to box them as like, oh, those are infidels, or those are. So you go into this like the takfiri, the takfiri mindset of like, oh, they have to be Orthodox in order to be Copt. No, they have been there for ages and they are still proud Copts.
Ana, do you still remember the question? Because neither Yousef nor Marcus.
I do remember the question,
Okay.
and I think that it's really interesting answers you both provided, getting me thinking. But Yes, I think that there's a monumental difference between what it means universally to be Coptic and what it means personally to be Coptic. I think that um, Yusuf already touched on this, but like it's going to be so different for every single person depending on what country they're living in or they have lived in for their most of their lives, their primary language, and how others around them are defining what Coptic is to them their whole life. And that's going to change things. And we also touched upon this in our like one-on-one chat on how, and Marcus talked a little bit about this, but how there are Coptic Orthodox churches in um, globally, in Thailand, in Turkey, in Syria, in even within the United States. A Coptic church in California is going to look very, very different from a Coptic church here in Massachusetts. And there are just certain like colloquial terms and things and ways of communicating, um, and the way that things are done in that regional area that are going to influence how I myself view being Coptic. So, um, for example, like I might have other emotional attachments to those like lowercase t traditions that are within the Coptic church that to me are part of my cultural frame or schema or lens of what being Coptic means. So like um things from how I say a certain hymn to like having beda for like the Coptic New Year, things like that. That those are going to change how I view being Coptic, what it means to me, the certain traditions and things that we practice in church that are, have a special place in my heart and have added to my experience of what being Coptic is over the years. And I think it's dangerous. It's really dangerous when we try to assign our whole holistic experience of being Coptic and what that means onto others, because my personal view of what being Coptic means might encapsulate certain things that being universally Coptic in general doesn't, and that another person might have things that add to their experience of what being Coptic means to them that I might not possess. That doesn't mean that one person is more or less Coptic than the other. Um, it just means that depending on where they attended their Coptic church, what people around them were telling them about being Coptic growing up, that's going to influence that and the things that their church practices. And I think it's a really big danger when we don't understand that. And I think that there is a concrete universal um, like identity of being Coptic. And I think that just comes down to like central beliefs and dogma and capital T traditions, um, that I think you, Mina, had defined pretty clearly um, in our one-on-one chat. And I think that when we don't understand the difference between those two, then it causes a lot of disagreement, a lot of, petty arguments in service and in how things should be delivered and in like it just creates a whole mess, which is why I think another one of the reasons why I think just intercultural communication is so important, especially for Copts who are growing up amidst like sometimes three different ethnic cultures and a spiritual cultural identity.
So all three of you started answering the follow-up question, which if there's a distinction between uh, my idea of what it means to be Coptic and a universal idea, if there is such a thing, right? If there is a universal Copticness, then, and Ana started touching on this, am I allowed to tell someone else that they're not Coptic?
You never are. I think that, okay. So in order to answer this question, let us tear ourselves down from our lofty places and return to the bare basics here and talk about, okay, what does Coptic mean? I love etymology, and so I think about where the word comes from before I think about what it defines. And so if I think of Coptic, I think of the Greek word that it comes from, which eventually, if you lead it back through a few corruptions, is Aegyptos. And then if you take it back a little bit further than that, it's them taking the town of Kift in Egypt, and then trying to say it in their Greek, and then it came out as Aegyptos. It's still our modern word for Egypt derives from that, and the modern word Coptic derives from that. And so I think you could correctly tell anybody that they're not Coptic if they're not from the town of Qift, but like I don't think that's what we're talking about, right? I think we've applied that now to a much bigger thing. So if we look at what it has most recently been applied to. If you say the word Coptic and you're not referring to the Coptic Orthodox Church, the word Coptic refers to a language. In particular, it refers to a stage of language, a written form of a language that has existed at least 5,000 years, that we have trickles of it going back 7,000 years. And if you take that beautiful language that we carved on our ancient temple walls, and you take it and then you corrupt it so that it can be written on paper in a way that's readable, and then you make that in a way that anyone can just scribble and pass to the guy next to him, and they'd be able to read it. And then finally, you live in a world where everybody speaks Greek, and so you can just transcribe it into a Greek alphabet, because the word comes from Greek anyway, we may as well. And so you do the whole thing, and Coptic describes that. Does anybody on the planet speak Coptic? Couple dozen. Does that disqualify you from being Coptic? No. So it's got to be deeper than that. And at that point, you run out of official definitions for Coptic. So I think you can't exclude someone. That's it. This is it.
Um, just a distinction here with the growing of the church and with with the growing of the church and with having many um, not Egyptians, non-Egyptians converting and being Coptic Orthodox. So I think it's fair to say that you you can't consider yourself as a Copt if you are a non-Copt, but you are a Coptic Orthodox convert. So there should be a distinction here, because here I think yes, ethnicity is a contrast and everything, but like a Coptic convert, this is a believer. This person is not a Coptic Orthodox convert, is a believer of that person joined a church, not an ethnicity. So it's important just to distinctive to make a distinction with that. And yeah, because yeah, it's important to put a distinction, because I see many non Copts, Coptic Orthodox converts who feel like, yeah, Orthodoxy, being Coptic Orthodox is orthodoxy, and what you are saying is not orthodoxy. Where in reality, that person or most converts don't really know many about our culture as Copts, our ethnicity. They didn't go through the same migration process to North America. They didn't grow up, they don't have families in Egypt or Sudan or Ethiopia, but they have that lineage, because ancestry is important, like um, in being Coptic. So this distinction is important.
So which one, if either one, you can say neither or you can say both, is one member of that group allowed to tell someone, no, you don't belong to this group? Can someone who identifies as a Copt look at someone else and say, no, you're not as Coptic as I am? Can someone who's Coptic Orthodox say, no, I don't think that you qualify to be Coptic Orthodox? Or are both groups sort of self-defined? And if someone else says, I'm also a member of this group, then you can see that they are allowed to self-define as well.
So I think it's two things. If you are if we're talking ancestrally, like people have like family trees. So if you don't have a Coptic ancestry, you can't any ancestry, even if it's very far. It's really hard to say I am the die-hard Copts. So it's and I'm not actually with the notion I would say you don't have the right to be Copts or you don't have the right to be Coptic Orthodox. I'm not really, because I see this happening online. I see this, and I have seen it a lot, and I don't think this is very exclusionary. But on the other side, even people like don't like um saying that you are not Orthodox enough, you are not Coptic Orthodox enough. The measures are so varied. And when we talk on the ground, how many of a congregate like congregants of any church know the theology and the dogma and all the things that define orthodoxy? For crying out loud, give me a break. It's most of my like grandparents don't know anything about or like theology or anything, but they are pious Coptic Orthodox folks, and we learned a lot from them. And this is what's unique about our orthodoxy. So yeah, it's this is my take.
Anna?
Yeah, I don't think anyone can like specifically tell someone like you're Coptic or not Coptic. And um I do recognize that lineage is important, and being like ethnically Coptic is something to take pride in, and it is, and it's something that's very special. And I started talking about this before, the the collective trauma of being a Copt, especially when your parents came from Egypt, or your grandparents came from Egypt, or you came from Egypt. And whether that was for um persecution reasons or not, you still faced feelings of being an outsider and feelings of being pushed away and rejected in your own home country. And that does create this sort of attitude of, again, like I had said before, like this is something that we struggled for and that we struggle to keep, an identity that we struggle to keep. So anyone who's going to convert, we have to be very careful about who can actually hold this title of being Coptic. And I think that that's very, very dangerous. And while lineage is a really great thing, something that I'm very proud of, someone who doesn't have a drop of Egyptian blood in their family, um, but who converted and is, people that I know personally like this, and who, whether or not they dive really deep into the theology and the specifics of our dogma and whatever, I think that at the root of it, only you can know, like, how much am I attaching myself to this faith and all the practices that come with it versus am I not? And maybe there are certain times in our lives when we feel more connected to them than others. But I think that that's something very personal. That's something that um, I can't determine about someone else from the outside, not being them, not having their thoughts, not having their experiences of coming to the faith from an outsider. And in my opinion, um, many people who convert can become, more Coptic than people who maybe identify as being ethnically Coptic. Like if they're not as attached to the practices that come with that and the beliefs that come with that, just because they were born into being Coptic and they're more distant from it, I don't think that that just automatically puts them like ahead or being at a higher level of Copticness than someone else. I think it's very personal, and I think that an individual knows whether or not they're really like in the faith, in everything that comes with it, or they're not.
I think you touched on something really cool there in terms of the way that lineage and our shared cultural history plays into the role here. And I think this is where the true marriage of the faith and the culture comes from, in my opinion. I know that practically speaking, it happens to be because members of this happen to be members of this, but I think that the philosophical way to think about it, so that I don't break, is to think about the church, the Bible and our religion being a way of overcoming collective trauma. And the Bible itself being a history of the collective trauma of the Jewish people, as first in their escape out of Egypt in the Exodus, which I could talk all day about, and second in the establishment and then the destruction of a state and a temple, and then the establishment again of a temple and the destruction of it. And I think that holding on to that, I think that's why the cult of martyrs is so strong in our church. It's because it comes from that tradition of overcoming overwhelming cultural oppression. And if you look at that, if you look at being Coptic as a lens of using religion to overcome cultural oppression, it paints a very interesting picture, because Egypt, culture, I think, can be defined historically, or if you want to talk about historical culture, we could talk about how contiguous a culture's expression has been over time. And I think ours is incredibly ancient, because we can trace a lot of these cultural artifacts all the way back to the pyramids and beyond. And we were talking just before the show how molokhia, which is like all of our favorite meals, has been around for like 1,000 years at least, if not more. Yeah, you should show us the shirt, man.
Show us the shirt. أنا بحب الملوخية.
My sister would love that shirt. I have to tell her about it. She's gonna want one. It's her absolute favorite food.
So I think if you were to talk about the picture of us as of being Coptic as a picture of being culturally oppressed and uniting through that, then the church has a very important role to play. But I think it's the other important role is the descriptive nature of it, in that it helps us make sense of the cultural oppression that we face.
Right.
And I think in a similar way, the reason that I would love to talk about the Exodus more is I think that that's going to define a lot of what happens in the 21st century, because I think we're in a critical phase of the Coptic Church, where up to this point, being Coptic meant living in Egypt up to 50 years ago. And there were one-offs where Coptic people left Egypt, and we have stories about that. But for the most part, the church did not support the export of our religion and our culture until the 1950s and 60s. So you could say that this is our 40 years in the wilderness, and that we're still trying to find our footing. And I think the Bible picks 40 years for a reason. The 40 years is traditionally defined as a generation in the Bible, and to think that it takes a generation to find out, okay, once we go to our new place, once we're dislocated for a generation, what does it mean to be Coptic? That is the most important question to answer. And I think they knew that in the Bible, and they defined in the folks who were there with Moses defined that for themselves. And I think we have to do that now. And that's a huge calling and a huge burden that we have to live up to.
Yeah. I think that, like, of course, out of oppression is going to bring like major protectiveness. I think that just comes with the territory. And as we're talking about this, I keep thinking about, there's a parable in the Bible, I believe, about like the Christ's followers who have followed him for like a really long time and have, taken the narrow gate and all that, and they've, been really devout in their struggles in their toward a true like relationship with him and union with him. And then there are the people that, in the last hour they come to believe and they convert like truly, and they are seeking that communion with Christ. And all the believers who were there before and had struggled are like really upset and angry, and they're like, what, this isn't fair. And I think a lot of times that's what we do in our own communities, and we kind of miss the point of like what Christ is looking for in a Coptic person in terms of like what we actually believe. And so that's why I think it's looking at it from a spiritual lens is very important, because Christ is looking at the heart and not like, I'm born into a Coptic family and lineage, and I know all of the hymns very well and what they mean and their origins and where they came from and all these things, versus the person who's just seeking to learn and get closer to Christ with pure intentions. Not that the other person doesn't have pure intentions, but again, I think that remembering that, like, yes, our persecution is something that defined the religious group for a really long time. Things are changing a lot. And I talked about this before, that like globalization really is changing everything. And like culture is maybe at one time it was able to be defined as like within borders. Borders contained people that shared ideas and beliefs and religious beliefs and morals and ways of verbal and nonverbal communication, but that's just not the case anymore. And as you were saying, Yousef, I think it's going to be really, really interesting and really important what happens in these next couple years as, you know, first, second and third generation Egyptians and Copts are growing up and redefining what being Coptic is, because cultural groups at this point are always being redefined and renegotiated, and it might not just mean a language anymore or just mean a certain custom or practice anymore. Um, and I think we have to be careful with what we feel is important and is central to any of these identities that we take on, and what's peripheral and can change from individual to individual.
I think it's just a one chat, and I love the fact that you mentioned, Anna, that we are it's constantly changing, and the generations and the current generation and generation to come would re-identify or add to the identity of being Copt, and in no way I think we should have an exclusionary um, mentality in our community. Whether so I think that's so Mina's question is really one of the questions that are really readily available in our community, and it goes back to labeling people. Oh, are you Coptic enough, or are you not? Like I think exclusion shouldn't be on the table at all, but distinction is important. Like for example, some Copts identify as black, but our um, that definition of being black, or that identity of being black, is far different, or it can be really different than the experience of our African American siblings who identify as black, but for example they don't have history of slavery, which really have a major impact about their identity, like us having that martyrdom narrative that Yousef touched upon. So exclusion shouldn't be on the table because it's oppressive. We need to strive as a community to be an anti-oppressive community. So exclusion shouldn't be on the table, but distinction is always important.
So let me summarize a little bit here, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting anything that was said. Um, there's a Coptic identity that is more ethnic, more cultural, more, you know, how we relate to each other, that is non-faith based, that could be, you know, a more of an Egyptian identity, but with a Coptic flavor that a lot of times is self-defined and evolving. There's a difference between that and a Coptic Orthodox identity, which is something that is related to a faith community. And, you know, Marcus brought up the identity of being Coptic Catholic, right? And if someone's Coptic Catholic, I mean, if you take a picture of a Coptic Catholic service, it's going to look very, very similar to a Coptic Orthodox service with a few minor distinctions that we're not going to get into because they're going to cause a certain degree of scandal for some people. So if you say that one is more cultural and one is more of a religious group, and I'm not going to say spiritual because I think both of them are spiritual in some way. And just this past Sunday in our college group, we were talking about koinonia, like the fellowship that comes in a group. And you know, there was a lot of push to say, oh, this is a fellowship in a church group, a fellowship in a Christian group. And I pushed back with the question, can you have koinonia outside the church? And I think the consensus we came to was if the Holy Spirit is present, unifying people, that's the Holy Spirit's prerogative. We don't tell the Holy Spirit, no, 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 you can't go there, right? So if the Holy Spirit is there, then there's fellowship there that is a capital F koinonia fellowship. So I think you can have a spiritual connection in a Coptic community. You can have a spiritual connection in a Coptic Orthodox community. You can have a secular, non-spiritual Coptic community. You can have a secular, non-spiritual, unfortunate Coptic Orthodox community that focuses more on, legalism and exclusion and like, you're not one of us. And that's not, I wouldn't say that's really something that is a Christian principle. So that was helpful for me, for us to sort of discuss all of these things. And it's like, listen, both definitions exist. And I love Marcus's contributions to say, we want to make a distinction, but not to the point of excluding someone, right? And the idea of being Coptic Orthodox with the Coptic Orthodox people, being Coptic with the Coptic people, being just Egyptian with the Egyptian people, being North American with the North American people is exactly what St. Paul did when he says, I've become all things to all men. And, he's doing it from a stance of being a voice for the church and converting people to Christianity. But even if we just do it as a voice for love, and Jesus, before Jesus, established the church, he came to love. So if we extend that love and we say, listen, however I want to connect with someone, I'm going to connect, and there's no reason to tell somebody that they're not something because I'm the one that owns this definition. So I found this very helpful, so I appreciate that. Now, as you may expect, I must ask you something, and I want you guys to once again take turns with this. And I think this is, I mean, for me, this is a hard question. I don't know if I would be able to answer this, and I'm interested to see how you guys come up with this. But in my mind, yes, I completely agree that anytime you're engaging with someone else, you want to engage sort of on their home field, right? You don't want to say like, well, this is the way that I talk to people, and if you want to talk this way, like, I think taking an empathetic stance where you're going to say, listen, like, what do you like, or what do you like? I think that's great. But you personally, you identify personally, do you feel more comfortable with the Coptic cultural side of things, or do you feel more comfortable with the Coptic Orthodox side of things? Like, do you feel more at home with the label of being Coptic, or do you feel more comfortable with the label of being Coptic Orthodox? And you can say both, you can say neither, you can say one, but just, indulge me on which one you feel more comfortable with. So let's do reverse alphabetical by the last name. So Marcus, you get to go first.
Okay, Zacharia. So I get confused for a second because I was looking at the Yousef. So okay, so a personal experience, because again, I think you have like we all go through phases, and I went through many phases. So on the ground and practically, not on the books. When I was in circles who really embraced almost only or mostly theological debates and or theological basis, and mainly orthodox narrative to Copticity, I didn't feel as open and accepting to people who are outside of that bubble. But I was able to connect with a lot more, especially my family, like my ancestors, my grandparents, when I thought, because if when I keep thinking about my grandparents, who, so my grandparents, I had, yeah, so a grandma who didn't even read or write, but she was a very biased um, Coptic Orthodox person. If you asked her, like, what is Coptic Orthodoxy? What is theology? What is that? She won't really be able to identify what is that. But she was a very pious person. So that was a very cultural side of it. Like she used to listen to Odes on a cassette, um, loving the music, and not necessarily into reading the Bible or listening to sermons or getting deeper into the faith. But I love that I miss her food and the smell and the ambience and the environment when I go and enjoy with the family and all that. Yes, it's around feasts who can be spiritual, but it's a bigger picture. And when I started getting connected to, and guess what, living in Egypt, I only start getting connected to other non-Copts, including non-Orthodox folks, like non-Orthodox folks after graduating from university. Imagine that. So when I started connecting with folks who are outside of that Coptic Orthodox environment, I thought, oh, I can connect over Molokhia. I can connect over even the same food that we have at Eids or stuff like that. So um, I like I use the orthodoxy or faith part when I go to church, but in the broader, I am more comfortable with the cultural side of being Egyptian, um, Egyptian, Arab, Middle Eastern, all these things. I can an Arabic speaker. I could relate to so many things with many people with that identity more.
Okay. Anna?
Um, I would say neither because um I think if someone were to like just label me as Coptic, I associate that with more of the, how we sing certain hymns in church, certain um lowercase t traditions that come with being Coptic Orthodox Christian. And I have emotional attachments to those practices. So obviously, I feel very comfortable with that label. Um, but also, the Coptic Orthodox label specifically, um, I think that that's equally important to who I am and what I view as important to my identity. In that more so emphasizes truly what I believe, um, and how that in turn determines how I view the world around me and how I interact with it and how I interact with others, whether they share that faith or not. That's all dependent at the root, while there are other influences, but at the root on Orthodox Christianity. So both are equally comfortable and familiar to me, and both are equally important to me. But I do really think that um, at the end of the day, like for me, it's most important that I'm not losing touch with the Coptic Orthodox identity specifically. Because I think if we only boil it down to only the lowercase t traditions and, the specific teranim that I'm listening to for specific parts of the year and the different food I'm making for different parts of the year, all of that is really important. But if we only focus on that, I think um in my opinion we've missed the point. And what I said before, like in our previous conversation, um to on the contrary to what Marcus said, I feel very comfortable in more of in a very like theological setting and interacting with other people who don't necessarily share the Coptic part, because I think that is when we can really unlock, okay, what is at the root, what we believe as Orthodox Christians. And that's something that's really important to do and make connections with those people and interact with them and it will help us to learn more about ourselves. And I think for me, if my like two cultural schemas or lenses are Egyptian and American, and they form a Venn diagram, the center of that Venn diagram is going to be Coptic Orthodox Christianity. That's where they meet in the middle, and that's where I really distinguish like what I prioritize and identify with from each cultural group and from my spiritual identity as well.
So you started by saying neither, and then I heard an argument that sounded like mostly both, and then you finished with an argument that sounded like Coptic Orthodox.
Well, you asked what we were most comfortable with, and I think I'm equally comfortable with both. I think they're both emotionally important to me, but like personally, but I did want to just go off what Marcus said about how he doesn't feel as comfortable. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you don't feel as comfortable in like purely theological settings. I don't know if I'm
No, for me,
missing your
no, it's
words.
no. Maybe I would comment after Yusuf. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, keep going, because we'll
No,
get to Yousef. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave him
no,
out.
because
Don't worry.
I think maybe I was, from what I have said, I would be understood as I am not like as theologically oriented or stuff like that. But no, I think I just like to connect with more people than and um, uh, yeah. And I think actually also important to distinguish that people who like to really, like me, for example, who relate to culture, looking from outside more, um, can be also very theologically oriented and love the hymns and all the like all the music of the church and stuff like that. So, but it's just that choice that some people make or like to relate more to a certain part.
But mind you, like Marcus is also the one that had a mustache interview, like the initial one, that every like 4 to 6 minutes he'd say, "Well, I mean, Jesus said," and Saint Paul said, and I'm like, and every time he follows it with, "And I'm not a theologian. I'm not like." He basically gave me a 1.5 hour sermon, and he's like, "But like it's." مش عايز أوعظ. Like, like this is not theology. I'm like, Habibi, like, just own it, ya baba. Like, the whole thing is a spiritual experience to just talk with you. Like, you don't need to say the word Jesus. You don't need to say the word Saint Paul. You don't need to say the word the Bible. If it's a spiritual experience to talk to someone, I think that's theological enough, at least for me.
But that wasn't the case when I was in the circles that was really focused on theological debates and just اجتماعات at church. I believe that that experience was people were talking in a vacuum, unfortunately. And I don't like to put a big blanket, but I learned how to phrase my theology as a frontliner working in a non-religious, like not for profit, who don't label people um, with their backgrounds. And my theological background got harnessed, I guess, as Mina said in the interview, by because of that work that wasn't labeled as orthodox or Coptic or anything. And this is how I can relate to so many things. So I think, regardless of people, how I think, in my opinion, we need to have, I don't know. I think we need to get out of any exclusional terms that and get our faith to the ground. Like, and yeah, what are we doing on the streets? And not missionizing, not converting people, proselytizing. No, it's just yeah. I don't know. This is another
I
rant. I'm
think if
sorry.
I gave Marcus the choice between Coptic, Egyptian, African, or world, he would pick world. If I have given the choice between Coptic Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Orthodox, or Christian, he'd pick Christian, right? Like, I love that about Marcus, that he'll pick probably like the broadest category that's the most inclusive.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
of the two choices I gave him, it's like Coptic Orthodox. He's like, this one's broader. I'll take this one. And Ana, I heard you kind of say, like, when you say neither, you mean both. Yes.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
equally as like emotionally attached to both, but I think overall it's the Orthodox one specifically is more important,
Right.
or
And
in general.
right. For you personally, not to exclude others, disclaimer,
Yes.
all sorts. Yousef.
So I'll again throw everyone a curveball for a second. I'll first start by echoing Marcus. I think, Marcus, I totally agree with you. I felt a lot of the same things that you explained, feeling about being in a circle of people who were very overly stuck on legalisms and theologisms, and that felt very exclusionary at the time. And I think a lot of the people that were in that group have grown from it, and I think that says something about what happens when you try to be exclusionary. I don't think that's a winning strategy. And so to that end, I would identify more as a Coptic rather than a Coptic Orthodox person, especially given my true, really deep love for our history and our culture, our language, etc. But I'm going to make a very strong case now that we should use neither term, because I think Coptic is a dated term that describes something that none of us really are or speak. Amina's laughing, and I know why. So here's my pitch. This one's a pitch. This one's a bat. Here's my pitch. I think that as a society, we have transitioned from Old Kingdom to Middle Kingdom to New Kingdom to, empire to subjugation, oppression, until our most recent subjugation, oppression over the last 1400, give or take, years. I think it is worth exploring whether we should continue to define ourselves as part of that phase in our history, because I think that phase in our history ended sometime in the 50s. Can't say when, maybe the 60s, but I think we should move past it. I think we're at that point in our history, and I'd like to propose a new term for us, one that does not come from an outsider's description of us like Egypt and Coptic does, which come from Greek words, which we are not Greek. I think we should use a word that we use to describe ourselves. And the way our ancestors separated themselves from everybody around them, they didn't think of themselves as Egypt and other places as other places. They thought that the people who were most associated with them were the people who lived on the Nile. If you lived on the black land of the Nile and you gained sustenance from its waters and its nutrients, then you were an Egyptian, as far as they were concerned. And if you instead made your living out in the desert, then you were not. You were a barbarian. And that was it. That was the separation as far as Egyptians were concerned for the first thousands of years of our history. And the word that they used to describe those black lands of the Nile, and I think that's important as well, given that perhaps it's incorrect to say that we belong to a black culture, but we certainly belong to an African culture, and our language and our roots and even our agriculture is a part of that. So I'd propose a term that comes from that. And the word that we used to describe the black lands was Kemet, KMT, because we didn't have vowels at the time, or we did, but we didn't speak them or write them. So in modern parlance, we just add E's in between. So Kemet is the closest way that we would formally say it today. Although who knows, maybe it's Kemt, maybe it's Kimti. In modern Coptic, we say Kimi as Kemet. So that's why the Coptic church is called Rem and Kimi. And I think we should go to that. I think to call ourselves Coptic is to pigeonhole ourselves into a period in our history, which is not true. I think it's like a German saying that he belongs to a Holy Roman Empire. At once it existed, but it's not a useful mechanism to talk about ourselves today. And I think that helps us avoid the pitfalls of identity that are related to the church and related to the ethnicity. I think we have so much to offer that to sit and pick hairs or split hairs is not the thing to do. Instead, it's to really redefine ourselves as we move forward into the 21st century.
So we have one vote for Coptic, one vote for both, but mostly Orthodox, and one vote for.
Right. That is exactly what I voted for. Yes.
But also again, my vote is like, go with the label that works most with whoever you are connecting with.
Yeah,
And
but those were the only two choices, Marcus. Those were the only two choices.
again, labeling.
What do you think of what Yousef just said about relabeling the label?
I'm all about non-mainstream stuff. So yeah, like if we can mainstream this, and do something that sounds new, that would host uh people a lot more underneath it, I would go for it. But can sometimes people use it. I'm not sure. Like when I looked it up, it's when I when you look it up, many African American folks, they use it and overuse it as us as Copts are. So the non-black people, or the people who are not that black enough in Egypt, are not kin to people. So so again, we would have to work it around, but or so yeah. But I think if we have an umbrella term, um, yeah, or maybe change the existing term, or the understanding of an existing term. I don't know. I would go with anything that would work with people.
Yeah, and I think this has come up several times, is the ongoing definition. And, a lot of the questions that I'm asking, I don't really personally care about any of these answers. And I think they're all false distinctions. Like, it's all like, come on, man, like, what are we talking about here? Like, let's move on to something. But I think that it's important to talk about, to sort of deconstruct and dismantle a lot of these um, ideas that we have. And there's a difference between my concept of something and what something is in the real world, and people aren't really able to make that distinction. And this is an ancient distinction. This isn't like a modern thing. Like Evagrius was talking about this, the noemata, the ideas that we have, the concepts that we have of certain things, are not really they're our own mental constructs of the physiomata, the things that are in the real world. And we have to let go of our idols, our ideas of, oh, this is what this sort of person is like. A Muslim person has to be like this, and a Coptic person has to be like that, and an American person must be like this. And we all do it, right? And when we deconstruct it and realize there's a difference between my personal and the universal, there's a difference between someone self-identifying as something and someone being labeled as something, right? You can't tell someone else you are not this good thing that you think that you are, and you can't tell someone you are this bad thing that I am labeling you with. So I've found this conversation helpful. I hope that people are less upset and more invited to think a little bit more broadly about, like, what do you mean Coptic is Coptic? Like, this is what it means to be Coptic. And it's like, oh, maybe it doesn't mean what I think it means. And like Marcus, you were saying, like, there's a difference using language to other or to exclude versus to make a distinction. And I think that I hope that anytime we're using certain words, we're not using it to other or to exclude. And if someone feels othered or excluded, they speak up and they say, "Hey, I don't like." I'll share with you guys a funny thing. You guys are familiar with the Agape Project, and it's all women. Like, it's all women, and then there's like the two priests and me, like the rodeo clown of the group. And one of my favorite people on the group is Mary Beseda. And she always, like, on text messages or, like, referring to people, she says humans. She says, thank you humans, or, nice to see you humans, or something like that. And I have to be the annoying guy that goes, I feel excluded by that. I feel othered by that. I'm like, listen, like you have to be inclusive of the people that don't identify as human, or have been excluded by the humans. Like, you need to include me also.
We should have
Uh,
like a show about the like these because I loved. I'm sorry, I love these cheesy Egyptian jokes. I love them. So we should have.
Actually, you know what we should do? You know what we should do? Actually, I've been dying. Do you guys know Amir Tedros?
No.
He's Coptic famous. He's Facebook famous. Amir is one of my favorite people. Like, I've known him since I was in like either middle school or high school. Like, we've known each other forever. And yes, that's a long time. And I told him, I was like, Amir, we should do a comedy retreat. And he goes,
I'm in.
what do you mean? I'm like, like a retreat. You know how like normally we have like lectures, and they're like spiritual lectures and like meals and like things like that. And then they're like, okay, you can have 20 minutes to do a skit. No, 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 no. The whole retreat will be skits and
Yes.
comedy and like
Yes.
stand up.
Yes.
And then like we'll have like 20 minutes like, okay, Abuna, ممكن تقول لنا كلمة بس كده يعني, just so we can make it like a, retreat. But the center of the retreat is not going to be anything but the comedy. And he's hysterical. He's hysterical.
يكون مؤتمر روحي روحي روحي.
No, I think we'd have, like, honestly, like, I think that fellowship and that, spiritual connection that we have sort of in non, I don't even say non-traditional, but non-rigid ways. Like, let's be flexible in the way that we connect with each other. And I think a lot of good can come from that. So we'll start maybe with like a Zoom stash comedy conversation with Amir. I'll invite him. We'll do just one of, actually Ralph would be totally down to do that as well. Cool, guys. Any last words? So usually it's just one person that I'm asking, but all three of you are invited to share your reflections on the conversation, which I benefited from greatly. Thank you.
I did want to add on to what Yousef said. I think that was really interesting. The idea of like coming up with a new term to redefine ourselves as a group. And I actually think that, that has the potential to do more harm than good. Especially for a group like us with people with very polarizing opinions and things like that. I think, as I was saying before, words and language, these are things that are redefined and changing all the time, and we are in complete control of what that means. So yes, being Coptic, I think, means something completely different now than it did thousands of years ago. And that's okay. I think like we need to be comfortable with the fact that being Coptic and what that means is changing, just as the world is changing. And maybe it meant being within the confines of the Egyptian or the Sudanese border before, but now it doesn't. And that doesn't need to be something that's scary or something that we feel is language that's exclusive, because again, like, we are redefining what being Coptic means. So Coptic is taking on a different, has different implications now than it did before. And I think like if we wanted to keep finding new words for it, it has the potential to do a lot more harm than good, and just like keep going in circles. Like, just like being an American means something very, very different now than it did hundreds of years ago. Like, just because we are, a country more of like a melting pot now, or like whatever people call it. Some people prefer the term tossed salad or whatever that means to you. Like, it doesn't mean like being native to the American land anymore. But I don't think that means that we have to create new terms to define that, because it's going to change again and again and again. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. We're like refining and sharpening our definition of like how we see ourselves and how we see others around us.
Get that. I don't know that I fully agree with every point that you've made, but I hear what you're saying, and I think that I would draw a distinction between coming up with a word to. I don't want to redefine us so much as I want to introduce a new word to the conversation that describes more than, as you say, just us. I think comedic, the way that I intended, or I hope that that's the way that it came across, is to be a much more big tent term that includes us, but includes others who otherwise would not be able to find themselves under the umbrella term of Coptic Orthodox or Coptic even. But to wrap this all up with a nice bow, I think I always love pointing out that all of this should be done through a lens of love and peace as much as possible, to try and bring people together rather than tear people apart. And I think if you start with that, and that's your intention, then you really can't go wrong. And so I'm going to exhort people to do that regardless of your views on this conversation. And on a separate note, I'll say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone too.
Actually, I'm planning on posting this on New Year's Day with New Year, new format. So
Cool, good to know.
Awesome. No, that's exciting. And for me, I think I'm super excited that we are having these conversations in our community. Finally, it's so refreshing, and this is the benefit of living in North America or in the diaspora, where we have these spaces that um, our ancestors didn't have that space, or even our parents didn't have that space to discuss and to converse in a very inclusive and open and accepting and non-exclusionary, non-oppressive, and to many conversations to come through this platform. And I encourage any person who is listening and watching it to take such way of conversing inside almost any setting in any Coptic setting, whether inside the church or outside. How exciting that would be um, to live at like this environment to our kids or to generations to come, just to give them the opportunity not to be boxed or feel the need that they need just to be in this form in order to be Copts. Imagine how positive them growing up would be, and reconciling, oh, I can be Coptic and I also am American, Canadian, whatever I would choose to relate to. Yeah.
amen.
I
Thank you,
enjoyed
guys.
learning from all of you.
Same here.
This
It was
been
a
great
pleasure to have you guys all here. And we'll look forward to seeing what fruit this bears. Bye,
Happy
guys.
New Year.
Thank you for listening.